Americans have an outsized appetite to take action on issues, and they expect brands to do the same. At least, that's the message of the recent report Doing Business in an Activist World from the Global Strategy Group. But are they right that companies should be actively taking sides in a polarised world, or is it simply the voice of left-wing activists looking to further their campaigns with no care to the damage that might be done to the companies that respond? My name's Mallen Baker. This is the Mallen Baker Show for Changemakers. Now, I've been involved in this thing called corporate social responsibility for a couple of decades. It's always been the case that part of that agenda has included the thorny issue of how companies interact with the public policy agenda. Traditionally, companies have always lobbied government, particularly over issues of commercial self-interest. And that's fine. Governments need to be informed when it makes decisions by the people that are likely to feel the consequences of those decisions. In that situation, all you really ask is that companies are not allowed to buy undue influence to the detriment of the public good. But then as companies start to see themselves as corporate citizens, not just commercial entities, there's been another layer on top of that. If a company is seeing the impact of climate change in its supply chain, for example, it may be more strongly motivated to get lawmakers to understand what they're seeing and how it's going to affect them. If they're getting involved in social issues, whether it's supporting disabled employees or trying to tackle homelessness or support education, they may lobby lawmakers to tackle the problem where it's appropriate for public policy to play its part. But here's the problem. We live in increasingly polarised times. And of course this applies to a number of countries. For this video I'm going to focus on the US specifically. What happens there often happens elsewhere eventually. Party political debate in the US has become highly tribal. The left has moved further to the left, the right has moved further to the right. And now we started to see the relatively new phenomenon of companies not simply taking action on issues related to their business, but picking issues of current controversy to take sides on. And that's different. Traditionally, businesses have been neutral on party politics. And that's been a pretty good place to be. It means that you can sell to customers regardless of their political affiliation. It also means that you can retain the respect of both political wings, provided that neither becomes too rabidly anti-business. And that means that you may be able to influence both, which when it comes to issues like employment and environmental issues should surely be a good thing. But according to some, no longer good enough. And the authors of this report certainly think so. They argue that there's a reward for companies that take political action and there are penalties for inaction. They say that companies need to understand their customers' politics and their ideology and play to it. And they say the time to start is now. They asked a sample of people to describe companies that take a position on a political or social issue. Words that they came up with included trustworthy, mission-driven, responsible, reliable, bold, and progressive. But the bad words that you attract if you don't take any position include things like the following: out of touch, irresponsible, untrustworthy, selfish, and unpatriotic. However, you have to remember that was about companies taking any position on any issue, not explicitly throwing their weight onto one side of the party political divide. And you have to be careful what the data's actually telling you. Yes, companies have to get engaged with the relevant issues that affect their position in the world and in society. That isn't necessarily the same as becoming party political. According to the Global Strategy Group, you're already there. They say Americans view most companies as either Democratic or Republican leaning. Now that's a bit of a stretch based on a fairly limited piece of research. When you look at the map of the companies that fit such perceptions, the vast majority of them have been associated with taking action in one or more divisive issues in recent times. at least on the democratic side of the equation. Basically, you can look at this diagram and conclude tech companies mostly lean to the left, finance companies, presumably because they're about finance, surely mostly lean to the right. And that's the point. The ones on the right of the scale here are not particularly activist companies. And as the report admits, it's Democrats who have the heightened appetite for activism. And you can see this here as the favourability split between Republicans and Democrats is shown for different issues. Apart from a couple of issues that have more or less consensus, for every issue the Democrats are further across than Republicans. Probably that's partly because people on the political right are more likely to agree that businesses should remain non-political, that their job is to create jobs and wealth. And that's speculation on my part, because the data given doesn't provide that sort of detail. But it's also partly because the actual issues given are generally those associated with left-of-centre campaign positions. Current issues of concern for the right, such as freedom of speech in campuses, protecting the rights of gun owners, the right of the unborn, border security, and so on, these are not shown on this graph. Presumably the authors don't consider such things to be social issues companies should take an interest in, and that's part of the point. The authors of this report actually seem to lean left of centre. They identify taking action against the president as a factor that companies could be interested in, but gloomily acknowledge that the results suggest less interest in this. It's about the issues, not about the president. For now, they say, hopefully. As well as the carrot they hold in front of companies, saying that taking action on an issue will play well with the customer's base, they also hold up a big stick. People will boycott you if they don't like you, they say. Now, it's instructive to look at their map of who boycotts who. Republicans boycotted Target, Nike, Starbucks, Dick's Sporting Goods. What did they have in common? Well, they'd followed the advice of the report authors and they'd taken a stand. So while saying that taking action gets you credit and inaction gets you damage, actually it turns out that taking action can also damage you as well. It's worth noting that some of the smaller text, some Democrats also boycotted Nike and Starbucks, so it's not so easy to win loyalty from those on the left. So look, here's the point. Companies should absolutely aim to be good corporate citizens. Across the world, governments of every political hue expect you to take responsibility for your own impacts on the world and to play your part in solving some of the big societal problems where business brings something valuable to the table, whether it be expertise, innovation, or resources. And sometimes that's going to involve getting involved with issues, making a stand. Sometimes you do have to do exactly that. However, there's nothing to stop companies working to address issues in ways that take people with them rather than polarize. Most people will agree that companies should treat all of their people fairly. You don't have to dwell on all of the different identity groups that the political left puts such emphasis on in order to do that. Most people will agree companies should reduce their impact on the environment, and even where the issue of climate change has become rather politicised, focusing on the science and finding solutions that customers support for their overall benefits to them as customers means that those can still be addressed. And particularly with that last issue, we want businesses to have a beneficial influence on both sides of the divide. The Democrats may want to capture the issue as their own, but that is against our wider interests, because it's an issue that needs consensus. Businesses taking smart action on climate change and working behind the scenes to inform and motivate policymakers is a smart thing to do. Businesses weighing in, for instance, on specifically supporting the partisan and controversial measures like AOC's Green New Deal is much less helpful because it guarantees a loss of influence in those areas where influence is sorely needed. Companies are pragmatic entities, reacting to a changing world in order to continue to be successful. Campaigners would love you to abandon that pragmatism for some short-term benefit to their campaign. Be aware that by doing so, you're serving their interests to the detriment of your own, and ironically, to the detriment of the issues that you genuinely care about and want to advance. Smart, sustainable, socially responsible companies remain non-party political.